This episode of ACP FAQs is presented by the American Covenant Party, protecting democracy.
Hey guys, welcome to ACP FAQs. This November, you're going to hear a lot of political language trying to label you as a socialist, a fascist, a communist, or even a Republican. Not only is this pure nonsense, it's also irrelevant. There's only one thing that matters as we gear up for the upcoming election. Are we going to prioritize people or greed? To get the answer, we can actually use the federal budget for FY 2026. For the upcoming year, the total projected expenditures on what's called the primary expenditures, that's the total expenditures excluding interest payments, is Social Security, $1.7 trillion, Medicare, right at about $1 trillion, health, which includes Medicaid, the ACA, and federal employees, that's another $1 trillion, national defense, which is about $962 billion, social safety nets, welfare, that's $740 billion. Then we have veteran benefits and services, which comes in at $444 billion. And then finally, we have discretionary spending, which includes the actual work performed by federal agencies. That comes in at $370 billion. That comes to a total of $6.4 trillion. Now let's flip it over and look at the money coming in. Individual income taxes, $2.8 trillion. That one line is half of everything the federal government collects. Payroll taxes, that's Social Security and Medicare, coming straight out of your check. That's $1.8 trillion. And then we have custom duties, those are the tariffs, that's $418 billion. And then we have corporate income taxes, right at $404 billion. And then we have other, and that would include excise taxes, estate taxes, and fees, and that's $197 billion. That comes to a total of $5.6 trillion. So, when we compare the $5.6 trillion in expected revenue against the $6.4 trillion in non-interest expenditures, we're staring at around an $800 billion primary deficit. That annual deficit adds to the national debt, which now stands at $40 trillion, with interest payments approaching $1 trillion per year. Now, this budget reflects something that is truly unique to Americans. As Americans, our cultural identity is deeply rooted in the ideal of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we believe that there is no greater system that delivers on those aspirations like capitalism. We equate free markets with freedom itself. We believe that to be a good American is to be a good capitalist. We treat capitalists like gurus, figures who, through sheer force of will, have conquered nature, mastered the marketplace, and unlocked the secrets to wealth generation. But then we collide with the hard reality of living in a complex nation of more than 300 million people. Making life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness real for the vast majority of Americans, the working class, the elderly, and the vulnerable, requires government spending and taxation. Think about the things we take for granted every single day. What about a strong military that can defend the country, clean water, safe working environments, the interstate highway system? What about the Food and Drug Administration, ensuring that the medicine in your cabinet is safe? What about the Centers for Disease Control and the National Institutes of Health funding the scientific research that actually cures diseases? What about the FBI, the federal courts, or the national parks we vacation in? And most importantly, what about the $1.7 trillion for Social Security and the $1 trillion for Medicare that protects our parents and grandparents from dying in poverty? What about the $740 billion social safety net programs that ensures basic survival and human dignity if you lose your job, get sick, or fall on hard times? The federal budget isn't just a boring spreadsheet. It is the literal engine that makes the American dream possible. These programs provide a necessary floor into people's lives. You cannot pursue happiness if you're starving, unhoused, or crushed by medical debt. These expenditures are how we, the people, through our government, actively prioritize life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all Americans. So, this leads us to the great American disconnect. For those who treat capitalism like it's the 11th commandment given to Israel on Mount Sinai, or better yet, for those for whom capitalism is the only true real religion, the federal budget represents pure socialism, the tool of the Antichrist. Federal taxes represents the theft of personal property, and federal expenditures represent the bribing of the public to line the pockets of greedy politicians who want to fund leftist, woke, transgender, transhumanist, feminist ideologies, or better yet, are using the budget to make 300 million people hopelessly dependent on government to enslave us to their will, which apparently they can easily accomplish by giving us free stuff. This belief system drives capitalist ideology, and in Ronald Reagan, they found their first modern presidential champion and most effective political spokesman. However, after the failure of the Reagan Revolution to rein in federal spending, the capitalists realized they had a massive political problem. We, the people, actually like our budget priorities. If a politician stands on the debate stage and says, "I am going to take away your Social Security and your Medicare," they'll be voted out of office. These programs are simply too popular to kill through a direct democratic vote. So, if you can't attack the expenditure side of the ledger directly, how do you destroy it? You attack the revenue side. You starve the beast. Using this strategy, Republicans started aggressive tax cuts, which were sold as economic growth and, by extension, individual freedom. There was no need to cut federal expenditures because, as any idiot knows, tax cuts always pay for themselves. Then, as the budget deficit exploded, Republican politicians started the next phase of the plan and began to scream, "The deficit is out of control, we are bankrupting the country, we have to make the hard choices." And what is the beast they demand we cut? It's never the military, it's never corporate subsidies. The beast is always the primary federal expenditures, the $6.4 trillion spent on Social Security, Medicare, and the working class safety nets. However, this strategy ran into a problem when Bill Clinton proved you could raise taxes on the rich, spur economic growth, pay federal expenditures while making cuts designed to eliminate waste, and still generate a budget surplus. In other words, Reaganomics was a failure. Not to be dissuaded, the capitalists were able to get Bush Jr. elected. Bush Jr., unlike Reagan, didn't merely adopt the capitalist ideology. Bush was born into it. He was molded by it. So like the good native son, he passed two massive tax cuts in 2001 and 2003. However, by aggressively cutting revenue while simultaneously expanding expenditures, specifically by launching two massive unfunded wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and creating a new Medicare prescription drug benefit, the surplus evaporated. The federal budget plunged into massive deficits. Given that Clinton raised taxes on the rich and we achieved record economic growth, while Reagan and Bush Jr. cut taxes on the rich and we got budget deficits, the rationale that tax cuts could spur economic growth was rendered moot. However, starve the beast wouldn't die. How does the starve the beast trap work in the real world? Let's take a look at the presidency of Barack Obama. When Obama took office in 2009, he inherited a collapsing economy. To stop a total depression, the federal government had to step in. They executed massive bailouts for the financial sector and the auto industry, interventions that were actually initiated by George W. Bush. And they passed major infrastructure and social spending bills to keep the working class afloat. On top of that, Obama did something that shocked Washington. He decided to use honest math. For years, the billions spent on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were kept off the official books in emergency accounts. Obama put those wars back on the actual budget. Because of the economic collapse, the bailouts, and the honest war accounting, the federal deficit naturally spiked, and that's exactly when the capitalists sprung the trap. The trap was weaponizing the deficit. Suddenly, the same politicians who had happily voted for the Bush tax cuts and the unfunded wars pivoted. It was time to pounce. Overnight, the rallying cry became control. We're mortgaging the future of our children. They branded Obama the socialist in chief and named all of their fabricated outrage as the signature legislation, the Affordable Care Act. They painted the expansion of health care not as a necessary safety net, but as a socialist utopia that was going to bankrupt the nation, or worse yet, kill grandma. It was a brilliant, cynical piece of political theater, and it worked. Riding a wave of engineered panic over the deficit, Republicans swept the 2010 midterms. Now, they had Obama cornered. Republicans refused to raise the debt ceiling, which allows government to borrow money to service the federal budget. which meant they were literally threatening to default on the U.S. economy unless the government drastically cut spending. Here's where history proves what this fight is really about. Obama went out of his way to find a balance. He sat down with Republican Speaker of the House John Boehner to hammer out what was called the grand bargain. Obama offered massive concessions. He was willing to make painful, structural cuts to federal expenditures, including cuts to the sacred safety nets of Medicare and Social Security. All he asked in return was a balanced approach. For every few dollars in spending cuts, the capitalists would have to give up a few tax loopholes to increase revenue. But the grand bargain collapsed. Why? Because Bill Clinton had called the capitalist bluff in 95 and 96 by refusing to budge on their budget cut demands, eventually forcing them to negotiate a deal in which he came out the winner. Understanding they were being set up for the exact same outcome with Obama, even as he was giving into their spending cuts, the capitalists told Republicans, walk away. And they obediently followed orders. They walked away because the goal was never balancing the budget. The goal was to protect the revenue side of the ledger at all costs. The capitalists proved they would rather let the country default on its debt than ask the wealthiest Americans to pay a single penny more in taxes. To avoid a federal default during the 2011 debt-ceiling crisis, President Obama agreed to the Budget Control Act, which imposed sequestration, which are automatic across-the-board cuts to federal programs, which took effect during his second term. But when Donald Trump entered office, those spending restraints were repeatedly loosened. At the same time, Republicans enacted major tax cuts for corporations and the wealthy while pursuing new spending priorities, including the construction of a border wall. The result was not fiscal discipline, but a sharp expansion of the federal deficit. This is the ultimate lesson of the Obama years. He entered office amid an economic collapse and inherited a government rescue of the very financial institutions whose recklessness had created the crisis. His administration continued using public money to stabilize the financial system, and he was roundly criticized for bailing out Wall Street while millions of ordinary Americans lost their jobs, homes, and savings. Yet, Obama spent the remainder of his presidency pursuing a fair and balanced compromise with the capitalists. What we learned is that there can be no lasting compromise with an elite that accepts government intervention when public money protects private wealth, but condemns that same government as socialist when it protects workers, retirees, and vulnerable families. When public spending is called socialism and taxing the rich is called theft, nothing short of dismantling the working class safety net will ever be enough. This brings us to the fatal flaw of the capitalists. It's not enough for them to be the richest people in society. They must also believe they are the best people in society. They have convinced themselves that they are not merely accumulating wealth, they are performing a profound moral good by creating it. When they look in the mirror, they don't see oligarchs. They see visionaries, benefactors, and saviors. So why do they believe they possess a divine right to lead society? And why do they believe their wealth, including the taxes they owe, should remain beyond the reach of the public? Their worldview rests on four core rationalizations. One, they are the job creators. Without them, society stops. They are the sole engine of human progress. The working class doesn't build the economy. The working class is just lucky to be allowed inside the factory. So any wealth the capitalists accumulate is completely justified because they are the job creators. Two, meritocracy. Wealth equals virtue. They are the perfect judge of human character. If you are a billionaire, you are smarter, harder working, and morally superior. Of course, if you need the $740 billion safety net to survive, it's because of your own moral failure. Their wealth is not a product of any type of structural advantage. It's proof of their superior virtue. Three, they are the rational steward. They understand that democracy is messy, emotional, and dangerous. When we look at the masses, we see people. When they look at the masses, they see a mob. As the educated, the elite, the successful, they are the only ones rational enough to steer the ship. They don't want to destroy government. They just want government to answer to them because they believe they know what's best. Four, they are the benevolent kings, the philanthropy over policy. They believe society shouldn't rely on the socialism of the federal budget. Instead, they believe society should rely on their charity. They would rather pay zero on corporate taxes than donate a fraction of their wealth to a museum or a foundation with their name on it. Why? Because the taxes are democratic. We, the people, decide how they're spent. Philanthropy is power. They get to play king and decide who gets to eat. And yet, for all the good they imagine themselves doing, they never perform any self-reflection. Instead, they remain convinced they are unfairly cast as villains by an ungrateful, ignorant, and selfish society. What then are these poor, misunderstood souls to do? One man would answer the call. Like the savior he believes himself to be, he was initially rejected by the capitalists, only to be fully embraced after rising again from the political grave. When DJT came down that escalator in 2015, and even through the election in 2020, the Silicon Valley tech bros, the Wall Street elite, and the polished corporate donors collectively clutched the pearls. They publicly rejected him. They called him uncouth, volatile, and a threat to the orderly markets. But why then did they really reject him? It wasn't because of his policies. It was because of their own hubris, arrogance, and pride. The capitalist class had spent decades hiding behind the polite mask of the rational stewards. They wanted the brutal economic reality of their Darwinistic world, but they wanted it wrapped in the polite, dignified language of a charity gala. Trump didn't play by those polite rules. He stripped away the PR. He said the quiet part out loud. To the Silicon Valley and Wall Street capitalists, Donald Trump was their mirror image. He was their very own portrait of Dorian Gray. He was the unvarnished, unapologetic reflection of their own agenda, dragged out of the country club and put on national TV for the whole world to see. They hated him because he showed them exactly what they looked like without the makeup. Their pride prevented them from recognizing the one man uniquely suited to lead them. Obsessed with protecting their respectable self-image, they failed to understand that their political savior had been staring in front of them all along in both 2016 and 2020. He wasn't there to destroy the system. He was there to put it on steroids. And as he passed massive corporate tax cuts and slashed the regulations that held their wealth in check, the capitalists began to slowly realize the truth. The man they rejected for being too crude was the only man capable of destroying the socialistic disease plaguing America. So great was Trump's political influence that he gave the very people the capitalists privately despised a reason to defend them. And he did it by building on an ever-expanding vocabulary of insults: DEI hires, baby killers, the transgenders, illegal aliens, Muslims, BLM, that Marxist group, libertarians, Democrats, socialists, communists, and anyone else his base despised. Anything to keep the public laughing at, fearing, and fighting one another, while the capitalist class quietly collects the tax cuts. To conservative Christians, he'd offered himself as a protector. I will defend you from those who hate God. I will win the cultural war on your behalf. Like the savior he imagines himself to be, he promised deliverance not from economic insecurity, but from a list of their cultural enemies. With Trump championing their policies and the MAGA army firmly behind him, the capitalist class went all in for Trump in 2024. And look at the results. Like the portrait of Dorian Gray, Trump bears all the ugliness while the capitalist class reaps all the rewards. So far, they have secured nearly everything on their ultimate wish list. Permanent tax cuts, locking in massive wealth transfers at the top, the privatization of space and AI, billions in federal funding funneled to tech billionaires while rolling back the regulations that keep those technologies safe for the public, resource extraction, the brazen willingness to leverage the U.S. military to secure oil and resources in foreign nations, treating the armed forces like private security for multinational corporations, the debt shift, a massive shift of the burden for paying down a national debt that's hurtling towards $40 trillion directly onto the backs of the working class, the attack on voting, a systemic assault on the democratic process itself. Because if you want to prevent the working class from using government to demand a fair share, you have to destroy the one mechanism that makes that socialistic nonsense possible: the right to vote. And while billionaires get their tax cuts at the federal level, look what happens at the state level. States following the capitalist playbooks are gutting their own income taxes for the rich. How do they make up for the shortfall? By squeezing the working class. We're seeing massive spikes in property values, skyrocketing property taxes, punishing insurance rates, and regressive sales taxes that hit the working poor the hardest. On top of all this, We stand at the precipice of a massive economic disruption as artificial intelligence threatens to eliminate or fundamentally transform millions of jobs. And what is the response from the capitalists? They have become so brazen and so emboldened that they now openly dictate which jobs will survive, what human labor will be worth, and what role ordinary people will be permitted to play in their economy of the future. We are watching the construction of a modern feudal order, a form of digital serfdom in which they own the technology, they control the capital, and the rest of us are left to compete for whatever scraps remain. And then the ultimate trap snaps shut. The capitalist class extracts billions from the government through contracts, subsidies, tax breaks, bailouts, and political access. They fill the administration with capitalists, buy influence through figures such as Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, and shape public policy to serve private wealth. Then they turn around and tell you that the government they bought is corrupt. But instead of blaming the people who purchased that influence, they tell us that government itself is the source of our anxiety. They tell us that the political class doesn't care about us, that our tax dollars are being wasted, that the only solution to cut taxes is to cut taxes, dismantle public programs, and get government out of the social safety net business. Their message is seductive. We shouldn't have to pay taxes, and neither should you. Keep a few more dollars in your pocket, cut the programs that protect you, gut the safety net, shrink the only institution powerful enough to restrain our concentrated wealth. And while working people celebrate the few extra pennies returned to them, the capitalist class walks away with billions, leaving everyone else to compete for increasingly scarce jobs, rising costs, and whatever scraps remain tomorrow. In Donald Trump, the capitalist class didn't merely find a politician. They found a spokesman. They found a savior. They found their own Dorian Gray, a man willing to bear the ugliness of their agenda while delivering the world they always wanted, a government remade in their own image. So, this November we have a choice to make. Invest in ourselves or surrender even more power to the capitalists. The federal budget is not merely a collection of numbers. It is a blueprint for the kind of society we choose to build. Public investment helped create the modern middle class, even as the same economic system produced an expanding class of millionaires and billionaires. But the capitalists view the budget primarily through the lens of property rights. To them, taxation means surrendering private property to a government from which they believe they receive nothing in return. They measure human worth by productivity, wealth, and economic output. That's why they rarely speak positively about work-life balance. Their message is always the same. If you want to succeed, work longer, sacrifice more, and ask for less. Their version of the American creed is not life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is life, liberty, and the protection of property rights, secured by a government of the capitalists, by the capitalists, and for the capitalists. In their America, the ultimate measure of their value is not who you are, how you serve your family, or what you contribute to your community. It is simply this: how much wealth can you produce? On the other hand, while we may respect certain accomplishments of the capitalist class, most of us don't define success solely by the accumulation of wealth. We're driven not only by the desire to succeed, but by the desire to live meaningful and fulfilling lives. We work hard, we are productive, but we also want time to enjoy our families, our friendship, our churches, our communities, and the people we love. In short, we want to experience life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness secured by a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. That means building a society in which we help each other, we help one another without first demanding proof that they deserve compassion. It means caring for children and the elderly, assisting those experiencing homelessness, and extending grace even to people who have made poor decisions. It means providing medical care when it's needed. It means investing in the education of our children so that the blessings we inherited can be passed forward to the next generation. The federal budget does not merely represent a political, social, or economic ideology. It represents the covenant that binds the American people together. Unlike nations whose identities are rooted in a common ancestry, ethnicity, religion, or history stretching back thousands of years, America is not a naturally formed people. What we share is citizenship. Some of us are Americans through birthright citizenship. Others became Americans through naturalization, by choosing this country and taking an oath to join it. We're not bound together by blood. We are bound together by a civic covenant, a commitment to live as one people, accept responsibility for one another, and preserve the promise of America for the generations that follow. The federal budget is just one of the clearest expressions of that covenant. It reveals what we are willing to protect, what we are willing to invest in, and what obligations we believe we owe one another. So, look closely at the budget. What would you cut? What would you protect? How would you pay for it? And how should our tax system be structured? Should it serve a covenant people or a capitalist elite? That is what your vote means this November. Everything else is just political noise. Thank you.